essentially what is contained in this. A new report on ending mass supervision and evaluating its reforms. This is the result of some very rigorous work done by our data lab in consultation with national experts. And I believe we have some pretty good news to tell in this report. But before we get to that, and before we get to our several guests who are here to assist and to speak with us on issues surrounding mass supervision, I do want to review some of the gun violence information from the last week. There were 7 homicides between April 11th and April 17th. 92 cases were opened involving guns or gun violence by the DAO. The median bail set for illegal possession of guns was around $137,500. Median bail set for violent offenses involving a gun was $125,000. Even though these numbers are up slightly from other weeks, it is yet one more example of the complete failure of cash bail to deal in a serious way with serious crime. Let us be clear once again, and we will take any questions if there are any on the gun violence issue shortly, but let us be clear once again. This is an office that has a nearly 85% conviction rate for shootings of all type, fatal and non-fatal. If any of you are thinking about picking up a gun and being involved in the violence that's happening on the street, please do not. If you are caught, we will convict you. 85% conviction rate is extremely high, among the very highest in the last 5 years. We are in a country right now that has experienced 50 mass shootings in the last 30 days, including most recently in Wisconsin, in Louisiana, and in Ohio. We have too many guns on the street. We have too much availability of guns. We have people getting AR-style automatic weapons who have been investigated for danger potential, and yet they can go and get them. At the level of our legislatures, state and federal, it is time for a change. All right, are there any questions on the gun violence issues? Well, then I'd like to invite everyone who is here, who is part of this presentation, to come up. And while we're doing that, I want to make sure I acknowledge some of the incredibly capable, hard work done by people and institutions to prepare this report. Please feel free to come on up. The work in this report was made possible thanks to funding from Arnold Ventures and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, who have given grant funding for our data lab, which is now approximately 15 analysts. We are grateful to people in this office: Alexa Sin-Q, Michelle Kilpatrick, Viet Nguyen, Liam Riley, Jane Rowe, Vinnie Schiraldi, who's not in this office but has been an important advisor and will actually be appearing by Zoom today, Judge Carolyn Temin, Wes Weaver, our data lab employees, and our policy team for their helpful input. In that vein, for the report itself, Tyler Tron, Sangeeta Prasad, Dana Bazelon, Christopher Austin, Molly Pickard, Mike Lee, Oren Gur, and Michael Hollander deserve special acknowledgement for this excellent work. All right, I'm going to summarize what I view as being some of the significance of this issue and this report, and then we will be hearing from some of our esteemed speakers here. Let me tell you who will actually be speaking. I will make my remarks, then Tyler Tron, Senior Analyst at the DAO's Data Lab, will speak. Acting Chief Public Defender Alan Tauber, who is filling that role right after the departure of Keir Bradford Gray, who has gone on to another phase, is here, and we're grateful for his being here. Vincent Schiraldi from the Columbia University Justice Lab, who is also the former New York City Probation Commissioner. Mr. Schiraldi will be available by Zoom. Council member Isaiah Thomas. It will also be available by Zoom. Dominic Speech of Power Corps should be here. Joanne Riggins. impacted by excessive probation and parole. And we also have available by Zoom Megan Ross, another impacted Philadelphian who has experienced probation and parole. All right, so I do think it's important to understand the significance of why we are here. We are here because two of our biggest problems in the United States are mass incarceration and its evil twin, mass supervision. Mass supervision not only is ineffective when the period of supervision goes much beyond 3 years, but it actually causes people to fail. It actually makes us less safe. It actually causes crime. I know that may not be obvious to those of you who have not, in one way or another, been in the system, but that is what the data says. And if you think about it for a minute, let me just share one example with you, because maybe it makes it clear. So imagine someone who does a couple of years in jail for involvement in drugs, comes out, gets a job with a landscaping company, and is doing everything we want that person to do. A decent, compassionate boss has hired someone with a felony, going to work, working hard, reconnecting with family, providing for that family, paying taxes, staying out of trouble, doing everything we want. 5 years pass on an excessively long period of supervision, and that Friday comes, the one where this parolee, this probationer, has to report to the PO. And this time, this decent boss says, no, you cannot go. We got bad weather coming in. We have to finish this job today. I got to pay payroll. I'm not getting paid unless it's done. I got to pay your payroll, and I'm not getting paid unless it's done. If you leave the job, I got no choice. I got to fire you. Well, okay. And what happens if he gets fired? If he gets fired, then he no longer has the ability to pay for his own supervision, which is often required on probation and parole. If he gets fired, he may be in violation of a condition, which is to remain employed, which can also happen. Here is someone who is doing the right thing, has been doing the right thing for years. And rather than probation and parole being supportive, it has become a tripwire. This is a person doing the right thing up against a system that is bad. On the other hand, if he says, you're right, boss, I'm staying right here, I'm not moving, he misses that appointment, it's a violation, and he can be back in front of a judge, and he can be in a jail cell with everything that this person has been able to build up in those 5 years broken: connection to family, connection to job, ability to be a provider, to support, to be a homeowner, to be a taxpayer, all of that broken. Well, that is how something that might seem innocuous, a few more years of supervision, is not. That is how it ends up being a ramp back to mass incarceration when it is excessive. And that's why it is important that we look at things like the numbers associated with mass supervision. In 2018, we came into this office to change how this office prosecutes and treats our fellow Philadelphians, how it impacts our most marginalized and neglected communities, and to change the culture of punishment and bureaucracy to one of service and support for residents. In 2018, Philadelphia had the highest rate of supervision and of incarceration among the biggest cities in the country. And just by way of reference, there were 40,000 people on the rolls of probation and parole when we got here, 40,000 people. New York City had 12,000. New York City, depending on the time of day, is 5 to 8 times bigger than Philadelphia. They had 12,000. Right now, Philadelphia, after all of these policies have been in effect, right now, Philadelphia's at about 28,000 or maybe 26,000. It's a big drop. But remember, New York City, 5 times bigger at least, had 12,000 when we got here. It's important to think of this also just in the terms of what it's like walking down a street. When we got here, when you walk down a street, 1 out of every 23 people you passed was currently on probation or parole. 1 out of every 14 African-American adults you passed was currently on probation and parole. And the number for African-American men is probably something like 1 out of 9 in the city of Philadelphia. That is astounding. It's invisible, it's terrible, and it's astounding. So we have more work to do. Now, I want to be clear, probation and parole, when used appropriately, play an important role in public safety. Proper supervision can provide structure and access to services that can benefit returning citizens, but studies show that the effectiveness diminishes over time. I also want to be clear that we support hardworking probation and parole officers who are out to make a difference, not only in the lives of the people they supervise, but in the lives of other Philadelphians who need to be safe. But we do them no favor when we overload them with far too many cases. When we got here, the caseload of county probation and parole officers was twice the ceiling, the normal ceiling, the national standard. It was twice that. And that, of course, meant that there was no way that they could focus seriously on the most serious offenders. There was no way that they could focus seriously on the greatest needs, which is, of course, their purpose. Just as in our prisons, people on probation and parole in Philly are disproportionately Black and poor. Well, let me do this. Let me move on now. I'm thrilled to be joined by criminal justice reformers, people who have knowledge of the system, who are prepared to talk about this. But I think we should get into the details first. So I'm going to ask one of the key authors of this report, Tyler Tran, to come forward and to go through a slide presentation that should give you a flavor of the details in this report. Mr. Tran?
Thank you, DA Krasner. I work in the data lab, which is a relatively new unit at the DAO. The unit has a goal of increasing accountability and transparency within the office. This report is just one example of that commitment to increase transparency. DA Krasner put a bit of the problem with mass supervision into context, but just to give a few more details. In 2018, which is when we had the most recent statistics, PA had the 3rd highest supervision rate out of all states in the country. Philadelphia supervised residents at 1.5 times the rate of PA, so an even higher rate of supervision. Under DA Krasner's policies to end mass supervision, the median community supervision sentence lengths dropped 25% for both felonies and misdemeanors. For felonies, that's a 12-month reduction in the community supervision length. For misdemeanors, that's a 3-month reduction. Overall, when we're looking at all the cases together, supervision sentence lengths are 10 months shorter now on average than they were before the reforms. The criminal justice system is racist, and racial disparities can be seen throughout all parts of the system, from arrest to charging to conviction and sentencing and beyond. These policies reduced racial disparities in community supervision sentencing. Before the reforms, white defendants received sentences that were on average 11 months shorter than those received by Black and Latinx defendants. Currently, Black and Latinx defendants, the disparity between Black and Latinx defendants and white defendants is between 5 and 7 months. So these policies reduce the racial disparity, though there's still work to do. Because most people who are system involved are men, when we show aggregate statistics like medians and means, what we're really showing is often a reflection of the trends for men. But notably, under these policies, we're seeing similar reductions for women in the system, reductions in supervision length and reductions in racial disparities. Importantly, we've seen no difference in the recharge rate of people sentenced to probation before the reforms versus those sentenced to probation afterwards. Stated differently, these policies reduced supervision sentence lengths without an increase in rearrest or recharging, without harms to public safety. I just want to give a few metrics to give a sense of that shrinking footprint of community supervision in Philly over the past couple of years, both as a result of these policies and other practices such as early probation termination as an example. Currently, there are 14,000 fewer people on county probation and parole than there were in 2018. That's a reduction of about 33%, or 1/3. In the first 2 years of the Krasner administration, 38,000 fewer years of supervision were imposed compared to the 2 years prior. That reduction in the future years of supervision could lead to potential savings to the city and to the state between $15 and $40 million. That's money that could and should be reinvested in the communities that are hit hardest by mass supervision. And when comparing to longer-term trends, the reductions are even more drastic. Compared to 2014, the number of future years of supervision that were imposed in 2019 is 63% less. That's a 2/3 reduction. When there are fewer people on supervision, that means fewer people are being fed into the system of mass incarceration as well. And more people were able to live their lives in their communities, supporting their families and supporting their communities. So I want to thank you for being here today, and all this work wouldn't have been possible without the help of the attorneys who are on the ground implementing these policies, colleagues in the data lab, as well as funders from Arnold Ventures, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and the Stoneman Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's supposed to be an adversarial system, but I would like to think it's not adversarial to the truth. And so I'm going to invite to come up and speak for a moment our acting chief defender, Alan Tauber. Many of you may remember him, among other things, for his involvement in the Chester Holman case. Mr. Holman was an innocent man who sat in jail for a very, very long time and was released because the defense and the prosecution were not adversarial to the truth. And we thank Mr. Tauber for that. Mr. Tauber.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the District Attorney Krasner for inviting the Defender Association to participate in this press conference for the announcement of what is welcome good news. Before making my remarks, however, I want to acknowledge the presence of Councilman Isaiah Thomas, who I understand is attending via Zoom. Councilman Thomas is a passionate advocate for criminal justice reform in our city. We're ever grateful for his interest in and commitment to reduce bias and improving fairness in the administration of our criminal laws here. At the Defender Association, our attorneys have been fighting for many years to end mass supervision, both systemically and one case at a time. From the daily interactions we have with our clients, we know that lengthy periods of supervision with long lists of rules and compliance requirements, payment obligations, meetings, and other conditions do not steer people away from incarceration, but rather lead them back to jail. So many people under lengthy supervision have multiple vulnerabilities, such as housing insecurity, poverty, impediments to employment, substance use, mental health challenges, and lengthy probation and parole make it more likely that they will eventually be tripped up and jailed for a violation. Between 2008 and 2018, prison population is down 21% for conduct other than a violation of probation and parole. For new offenses or violations of the criminal law, prison population is down nearly 20%. For violations of probation and parole, prison population is up 40%. Mass supervision directly feeds mass incarceration. Studies such as the one the district attorney is releasing today back this up 100%. We are grateful that this district attorney has recognized this reality and has joined us in embracing principles of probation and parole reform that shorten terms of supervision and shorten the roles of those on probation and parole. The report being released today is evidence of good progress. We understand that institutional change does not happen overnight, and there is indeed much more work to be done. For our part, the Defender Association continues to file every single day petitions for early termination of probation and parole. In the past 2 years alone, we have filed 1,700 such petitions, 80% of which have been granted. Rearrest rates for this group fall far below the overall rates for rearrest generally in Philadelphia. This is proof that we can reform our probation and parole practices without any added threat to public safety. The DA has been a cooperative partner in this effort, and we are grateful for this collaboration. A majority of people incarcerated in our county jails are held there on probation or parole detainers. Detainers, simply put, are court orders that require a person on supervision to be jailed because he or she has broken the rules of supervision or was arrested on a new criminal charge where they are presumed innocent. Even if they can pay bail on the new charge, they cannot be released under the rules of a probation detainer. Overwhelmingly, those with detainers held in the county jail pose no threat of violence or any threat of flight and do not need to be incarcerated. How can I say this? Well, last summer, in the darkest days of the COVID pandemic, the Defender Association, the District Attorney's Office, and the courts in Philadelphia collaborated to create an expedited hearing program that led to the release of 1,500 people from Philadelphia county jails, most of whom had detainers for probation or parole violations. They were provided access to assistance from social service agencies, community groups, and other entities through referrals and relationships with the Defender Association. That is a 20% reduction in the county prison population. It should not take a once-in-a-generation pandemic to show us the way to intelligent reform. For those released in this program, rearrest rates were substantially lower than the average rates in Philadelphia. Savings to the city was estimated at nearly $15 million, money that could go to services to help people succeed rather than be warehoused. This is clearly evidence that positive change is possible without added threat to public safety. But change cannot come and will not last without structural changes to our system and institutional commitments such as those that the district attorney has committed to. Following this 20% reduction in the prison census last summer, the prison population has again spiked and yesterday peaked at over 4,800 people, which is higher than at the start of the COVID pandemic. This is evidence that the problem of mass supervision cannot be solved without structural changes and constant vigilance. We look forward to continuing to work with the district attorney and our other criminal justice partners in shortening the terms of probation and parole and the number of people on supervision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tauber. We will next be hearing by Zoom from Vincent Schiraldi of the Columbia University Justice Lab, who is arguably the leading expert in the United States, in my opinion, on probation and parole, not just from an academic perspective, but after having been the chief probation officer effectively for the city of New York. Mr. Schiraldi was consulted at length before policies that were enacted in 2018 and 2019 were enacted and has actually made suggestions for 2 more. We intend to move forward with those good suggestions in the next month or 2. To summarize them quickly, the first one is to tailor conditions of probation and parole to the individual defendant rather than have a laundry list of conditions. And the second is to incentivize sentences. Let me try that again. To incentivize excellent performance on probation and parole at the moment of sentencing by negotiating that if a particular probationer or parolee performs well, we are agreeing in advance that there should be an early termination of probation and parole as a consequence. And obviously, there will be specifics included there. It is an approach that has been done in legislation, in other ways, in other places, and we think it could be effective here. Without further ado, do we have Mr. Schiraldi by Zoom?
Yes, here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
We can hear
Well,
any-
thank you so much for inviting me, Larry. It was really fascinating to participate with you and your staff in this process. I just found it to be an incredibly thoughtful process where you brought in your district attorneys and some experts. I don't know who else you brought in, but I know I spoke with you and your staff on numerous occasions about the various reforms, but simultaneously you were able to raise funds to be able to research the outcomes so that we could all be standing here today to have this kind of rational conversation about these policy reforms. You've rightly targeted mass supervision as, I'm going to steal your line in a heartbeat, the evil twin of mass incarceration. Too many people who practice in this field, judges, probation officials, district attorneys, defense attorneys, labor under the delusion that if some probation is good, more probation must be better. And that just simply isn't the case. As a commissioner of probation, I talked with my staff, I talked with prosecutors and judges, I talked with people on probation, and there's really no more useless use of Philadelphian tax dollars than having the same conversation with a PO 3, 4, and 5 years into your supervision than you had in years 1 and 2. If somebody's under supervision and they're doing well, you should discharge them early. You should stop keeping people on supervision for such long periods of time for a couple of reasons. Most of the action on probation and parole is going to come in the first year to 18 months. That's why Harvard recommends that period of time. Pew Charitable Trusts, probation associations, no one's recommending people stay on any longer than that, because after that you have diminishing returns. Also, what happens after that is that you start picking people up for ticky-tack fouls, not for serious new offenses. That all that played itself out in the first 12, 18 months. Now it's missing appointments. It's the scenario you described where you're forcing somebody on probation to choose between their boss and their PO in a way where you really kind of want them working, but they have to fulfill that obligation to their probation officer. So they're caught in this sort of devil's bargain moment. And the evidence is just robust on this, that less is more when it comes to the amount of time you're under supervision, and particularly on people who are performing well. So I applaud your next step, which would be to sort of look at people's performance and say, hey, look, if you do well, I know you got 3 years, but if you do well, you can be off in 18 months. Or I know you got a year on this misdemeanor probation, but if you do well, you can be off in 6 months. 31 states do that. A lot of red states do that. Louisiana does that. Mississippi does that. People get off at about half the time. Why is that important? Because behavioral psychology tells us that incentives work better than punishments and threats of punishment. So you tell a young guy, you tell a 19-year-old kid who's on probation for boosting a car or burglary or whatever they're on probation for, that, yeah, you got 3 years, but if you keep your nose clean, you're going to be off in 18 months. And me and the public defender are going to go back in with a motion. That's real incentive for young people in particular, who view time very differently than us older folks. Remember how long college felt? That 4 years felt like an eternity. 3, 5 years on probation feels like a pretty long time. So what impressed me was that you had this methodical approach going in to something that's arguable. It's not crazy to think that maybe a 5-year term was a good idea, but there was evidence to say otherwise. You tested it, and now the outcomes are in. People are able to get off in shorter amounts of time, and that reduces racial disparities, and importantly, that does not increase crime. I think that Mr. Tran was right earlier on when he said that another step in this would be to capture some of those savings, the $15 to $40 million saved, and put them into communities in Philadelphia that have lots of people under supervision on them, so folks can be helped with getting a job, with completing their education, if they have mental health or substance abuse problems. So you can sort of gradually move away from mass supervision to something where your communities, who I know we're going to hear from next, so I'm going to shut up soon, can use their experience and their assets to help these young people in ways that we government officials never can. Try though we might. I'm not trying to diss your probation department. Try though we might, we are never going to be as good at this as community groups will be if some of the resources are shifted in their direction. So I applaud the work you've done in this area. Pennsylvania is still a nasty outlier in this space. And according to Mr. Tran, Philadelphia is a little nastier than the rest of the state. I was looking at some data today. 1 out of every 57 people in Pennsylvania is just on probation. South Carolina, it's 1 out of 125. Louisiana, it's 1 out of 102. So Pennsylvania is nearly double Louisiana and is double South Carolina. There's no reason for that. You've taken some good steps in this direction. I hope others in Pennsylvania follow your direction. And I look forward to working with you on the 2 items you mentioned in terms of tailoring conditions and incentivizing good behavior through early discharge. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny. Thank you for those remarks. And now we'd like to go to Councilmember Isaiah Thomas, who is available on Zoom and has been quite the leader when it comes to criminal justice reform, police reform in many different ways. We look forward to his comments. Councilmember.
Good morning, District Attorney Krasner. I'm hoping folks can hear me well. Thank you to you and your entire team for inviting me to be a part of the dialogue today. I commend your staff for the great work that's being done. I know firsthand what it means to be the elected official and get all the credit, but I also know the importance of the people behind the scene who do the work. So I commend everybody who the District Attorney recognized today for the great work that's done as it relates to this report. And I also wanted to say congratulations to our new acting Chief Defender, Mr. Alan Talbert. And I wanted to thank you for your kind remarks. Of course, like District Attorney Krasner, a former Chief Public Defender, Kiera Bradford Gray, is a good friend and was a strong advocate as it relates to criminal justice reform in the city of Philadelphia. And I do look forward to continuing work with the Defender's Office as well as your team as it relates to the different advocacy efforts and initiatives that we need to do to fight for the citizens of Philadelphia. So again, thank you to everybody for allowing me to be here a part of this conversation. An important thing that we discussed or was discussed earlier today, specifically around the initiatives through the District Attorney's Office was, I think, first and foremost, just this idea that the District Attorney talked about as it relates to how we treat Philadelphians. I think that it's important that we not just listen to people, but also respect people's lived experiences. And when people talk to us about the different things that they've experienced as it relates to the city of Philadelphia, it's imperative that we acknowledge it, but then we also do something about it. Because again, we know that there are systems that exist that have been oppressing poor people and people of color in the city of Philadelphia. And then the second idea that was discussed is just this idea of mass supervision. And when you're talking about mass supervision starts with a level of policing that we know is unjust and that disproportionately impacts people of color. And so putting multiple hats on, not just as a person of color who've been a victim of stop and frisk here in the city of Philadelphia, but also as the chair of Streets and Services, we have a huge problem as it relates to how we enforce traffic and traffic violations in the city of Philadelphia. On the one hand, we know that Black folks, specifically Black men, are disproportionately stopped, even in neighborhoods where Black people are not the majority. We also know that over 90% of the stops here in the city of Philadelphia lead to no citation, no contraband being found, and no illegal weapons. And so what does that tell us? That tells us that while we're having this method of looking at how we do traffic and public safety, on the other side, we know that we have this other quiet epidemic that we're a part of as it relates to hit and runs in the city of Philadelphia, where we're seeing more hit and runs that lead to a fatality than what we've seen in over a decade. So it puts us in a position where we really need to have a serious dialogue and serious questions as it relates to motor vehicle codes here in the state of Pennsylvania, specifically us in Philadelphia, how we enforce the motor vehicle code law here in the city of Philadelphia. There's been a lot of dialogue around the roles and responsibilities of police, not just who responds to 911 calls based on whatever emergency might present itself, but also who is responsible for traffic and traffic enforcement. And so what we've done, hopefully in the midst of trying to show solutions as it relates to this issue of not just all the responsibilities that police have, but also how we enforce traffic violations. We have the driving equality bill that we've been advocating for. It was introduced last October. And what we want to do is we want to look at how we enforce the motor vehicle code violations here in the city of Philadelphia. The Public Defender's Office, who again has been a great partner, has provided data and stats that would suggest that not only are a lot of violations, specifically ones that are not public safety violations, have led to negative interactions between communities and police, we also know that they're not the most effective way to spend taxpayer dollars to address crime. So our bill and our legislation will put us in a position where we will look at motor vehicle code violations like an expired registration, like a broken taillight, and suggest and recommend that we do not have to have an actual interaction between the law enforcement officer who recognized the violation and the driver who essentially committed the violation. We see it often with tickets that are mailed to people. We also see it in the form of other cities and municipalities where they do not use police officers to enforce traffic violations. They use other options and means. So the goal that we have is to continue to force the dialogue and the conversation around reimagining and being innovative as it relates to how we're policing here in the city of Philadelphia, but most importantly, how we limit the number of interactions between the average everyday citizen and police officers so we can avoid what's being talked about today as far as massive supervision. And again, massive supervision starts with a number of negative interactions that we know aren't needed. So again, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to speak about this important legislation today. We all know that in the wake of what has been happening with unarmed Black men being shot and killed by law enforcement, we want to be as innovative and creative as we can to limit and avoid as many future interactions like that as possible. Thank you, District Attorney Krasner. I appreciate the opportunity.
Council member, thank you so much. All right, we are a little behind. However, it's time for us to hear from people who have been living what we're talking about rather than studying what we're talking about. And so in the following order, I'm going to ask people who are actually in the room to come forward and to speak for a couple of minutes about your stories of being over supervised, what you have overcome, and where you are now. Our first speaker will be Dominic Speech of Power Corps. Next one will be, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speech is on Zoom. My apologies. All right, well, why don't we do that first, and then I will introduce those who are here in person. Mr. Speech.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank everyone at the District Attorney's Office for the work you've been doing around probation and parole, mass supervision. My name is Dominic Speech. I'm the program manager for TRUST. TRUST stands for the Road to an Ultimate Successful Transition, which is a reentry initiative at Power Corps PHL. I'm currently serving a 10-year probation sentence. This Thursday will make 5 years with no violations. For the past 4 years, I've been supervising members at Power Corps PHL who are on probation or parole supervision. A common struggle that I come across is members having to report during service hours. Most of the time, probation officers are not willing to compromise or work around members' work schedule. That becomes discouraging for some of our members, sometimes members will quit because their advocacy or our advocacy from the staff doesn't work. Probation has been one of the biggest barriers that I've seen as far as maintaining employment. I think we're just looking for some support when returning to society from our probation officers, but over supervision doesn't really help with that process. And a lot of the members that I work with are not a threat to society or any type of way. I think they only become a threat when they have to provide for themselves or for their family. So when probation kind of gets in the way of them feeding their families, then that becomes a problem with them committing crimes. So that's really what I have. Again, I'd like to thank everyone at the district attorney's office for pushing this. And I'd like to thank Brother Adrian McGill with the trust program over at PowerGore for this opportunity to speak. If you are interested in what we're doing with the trust program or at PowerGore, you can contact me at dspeech@educationworks.org. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Speech. And now present with us, I believe, we have Joanne Riggins, Mike Luna, Stephen Morales. I would ask for you to come forward, please, one after the other. No need to wait for me to come back up and introduce you, starting with Joanne Riggins and then Mike Luna and finally Stephen Morales. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Riggins, and I served 11 and a half months at RCF for dealing drugs, and I was innocent. I could not prove myself innocent, and I had to sit. When I got off, I was on probation for 3 years. I didn't get into any trouble. I had to try to maintain life after being locked up with having this on my record and it being hard for me. I couldn't get housing. I'm still actually trying to find a house for me and my kids due to the fact that I have this on my record. Finding a job is hard. Right now, I have a full-time employment job as a case manager at Stop and Surrender's Recovery House, but I feel as though I'm not going to be able to grow from there because of the fact that I don't have the resources, and me coming home without no resources, the system didn't help me. The reentry program they sent me to didn't help me. So I had to maintain and do everything on my own. I had to become a productive person of society all over again. And I did not know where to start. And like I said, no one helped. I was on supervised visit. I had to supervise call-ins for my probation officer. Every 2 months I had to call in just to make sure I was doing everything I had to do. And I got my CPR certifications while on probation. I completed, oh, I'm so nervous, I'm sorry. I completed, I had went to Women's Humane Society. I worked there for a while when I came home because I went through the New Leash on Life program and they really helped me. I keep in contact with them. Because of my criminal history, is like I said, it's hard to find housing because of the drugs. And everywhere I go to apply for housing, they feel as though I'm a drug dealer. That's something I'm not. I always worked hard for everything that I ever wanted in life. So when I had to go to prison, it was hard because I was innocent, like I said, and nobody there helped me. My lawyer never came to see me, and that's something that's stopping a lot of people in prison because if you're sitting in jail and you have a public defender, they're supposed to reach out to you. They're supposed to attempt to help you, and that's not what's happening. You get no help. So if you're fighting your case from the inside, you have no help, like at all, and that's not fair. But I'm getting my life back on track. Like I said, I have a full-time employment job. I'm taking care of my 4 kids, and I'm going to keep pushing forward until I have a house for me and my kids, and nothing's going to slow me down. And I'd like to say thank you for everyone that gave me the opportunity to come out here and share my story. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Luna. I first want to thank Mr. Stewart, Mr. Krasner, for having the courage to fight these evil forces that are out here to divide each and every one of us today. I first want to start with a quote from Frederick Douglass, who is one of my mentors and heroes. And the quote says, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. A broken system that exploits vulnerable people. I stand before you today with humble beginnings, here today to show gratitude towards expression and how life's purpose adds value towards humanity. Becoming the change I want to see in the world is extremely hard. Far too often in my community, we hear and see the symptoms of systemic oppression, but never hear and want to talk about the root of these issues. When we address the root, people get well. And I'm here today to talk about my life and the specific of the systems that are designed to keep people oppressed and exploit them. I just want to give you a little bit of my world, young people. As a young child searching for purpose, medication, dependency set me up for a life of excuses and despair. Being placed on psychedelic meds, my life was taken from me before I even had a chance to live. Being raised in a mentally and verbal abusive household, as well as the absence of my father, added fury to my confusion and hopelessness. When I searched for nurturing, I received discipline. When I searched for understanding, I found demons staring at me right in my face. And when I needed unconditional love, I received confusion. A drastic need to fill a void from an absent father. I started to blame the world for the things that I needed to accept, but didn't know how to. Self-defeating thoughts of shame, guilt, resentment, and anger affected my life since early adolescence. Finding myself in a homeless shelter at the age of 20, I found trauma to be all around me. Introduced to alcohol, I started to abuse it to ease the pain. Wrong place, wrong time, I was robbed and shot. These strong acts of violence played a major part in my mental and psychological functioning. Introduced to Percocets to address my pain, I easily became addicted. However, there is healing in addressing trauma. As a suicide and a gunshot victim survivor, I am here today to tell you that the systems that are put in place to keep you oppressed is the same system we as the people can change. It took me to the age of 32 to realize how precious and delicate life is, and that's okay. July 4th, 2016 was the day I decided to seek help for my co-occurring disorders. From an inpatient mental institution to a drug rehabilitation center to the Community College of Philadelphia, where I spent 3 years working on an associate degree and graduated with high honors this past August of 2020 while on probation. Today makes 4 years, 9 months, and 15 days clean of drugs, alcohol, and mind-altering substances. As CCP's former student government president, I received introduction to a Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society where I received a full academic scholarship to receive an undergrad in psychology. Being accepted to Cheney University's Keystone's honors program has not only given me hope, but also allowed me to participate in the change I want to see in the world. To have purpose is to find meaning. My goal is to become a child psychologist, and I plan on implementing brand new ways of cognitive therapy to children suffering from the same inequalities and the disconnections I was forced to face growing up. The very system that took everything, including my life almost, has yet to show me why I should believe in such unjust ideologies, but has given me the upper hand because of my relatable experience. Connectivity to the world is my savior and can be yours if you're willing to understand and believe in the process. People want to help people who want to help themselves. The moment I realized no one owed me anything and started to do the work, I might have done what you said I did, but I'm not who you say I are. Thanks, Mr. Krasner, for the opportunity to be a part of a data-driven reform. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Morales. I work at Act Philly, otherwise known as Animal Control, as lead protection officer for the city of Philadelphia. I was originally sentenced to a 5-year probation. Being on probation did have its challenges as far as it fitting in with my work schedule and having that dark cloud looming over my head at work. Luckily, I had a good PO and an understanding director, which enabled me to prove my consistency and show them that I was in the right mindset to do the right thing as far as probation was concerned. even with all that, it was still hard to fulfill all of my probation obligations and report to work at the same time for years and take care of my family. I was fortunate enough to get my probation terminated early, which was a big morale booster for me. And ironically, since then, I've been promoted twice. I love what I do. I'm extremely happy. I'm in a good place in my life right now. And I just wanted to share that. I love the city of Philadelphia. I love everything that I do. And, thank you to the District Attorney's Office, New Leash on Life, and Act Philly for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank Megan Ross, who is available by Zoom, but given that we are running a bit late with the program, I think now is the right time to open up for questions. For those of you who Leash on Life from two different speakers, that is a fascinating program that begins in custody, connecting people who are approaching parole with dogs. And what we see time and again with that successful program is that it is supportive once they are released. Are there any questions? I'm sorry.
You mentioned the comparison to New York City. Why are the numbers, why have the numbers been so much higher?
Well, that's a great question, and there are a lot of aspects to it. One issue is that under Pennsylvania law, unlike many other states, if you get a sentence of X, a sentence of incarceration of X, it has to be done in the following form: X to 2X, X to 3X, X to 4X. So for example, a sentence of 2 to 4 years in custody is the lowest sentence you can give in terms of supervision. The supervision must be at least as long as the incarceration on any incarceration sentence. So if someone gets a 10-year sentence, they got to do at least 10 to 20. And it might very well be, because this has been the culture, 10 to 20 years, plus we'll give you 20 years of supervision after that on probation. So just because of that culture of you're starting out with at least as much time on parole supervision as you spent in custody, and then a culture of always putting probation after that, it racked up unbelievable quantities of supervision. Let me just give you a typical example from Philly, from all my years in the courts. Someone has a misdemeanor case, judge feels like jail is necessary, sentences 3 to 23 months, plus 3 years of supervision on probation. So you're doing 3 months in custody, you got another 20 out, and 6 out. You got 3 months in custody and 56 months of supervision. This was absolutely normal in this city for most of the last 3 decades. It's just sort of an aspect of the culture. So I think that is part of the reason. When you just keep loading up these incredibly long periods of supervision that are much longer than periods in custody, because you have this floor built into the state law, that's part of it. But we also can't ignore the obvious, which is that we are in a city that has national parks dedicated to ideals of freedom. And we have had for decades the highest levels of incarceration and of supervision and of poverty in this city. So there is a fundamental disconnect in Philly, and it has been for a long time, between what we aspire to stand for and what we actually stand for. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we are. Sorry? Oh, okay.